This week we're starting inflection and paradigms. So today is basically a much more in-depth discussion about the differences between inflection and derivation and what the binary and continuum approach means for how we think about language in the mind and its implications. So we will review the properties of inflections and derivations that we've seen so far and add some more. We'll see what the continuum approach looks like and ask ourselves if we actually favor a binary approach. There are some slides at the end of this lecture on exponents that we did not get to in class, so that will be covered next week, so don't worry about those slides. I think they're 15 to the end, but the one that we're ending with is the this slide right here, the really big questions. This is the final one that we'll talk about today. Okay, so what do we know so far? What we talked about last week were three core differences between inflection and derivation. So this is what you can use, and with a binary approach, most of the time you can pretty much determine whether something is a derivation or inflection. At least these are some of the properties that seem to be the most important. So inflections have to show up where they can. So because we have a he here and the third person singular agreement can show up, it must. If it doesn't show up, it's ungrammatical. While with derivation, you don't need it. So he walks quickly, to make that an adverb, we can put ly, but we don't have to. We can just say he walks quick, and quick can be used as an adverb in that sense. So it doesn't need to be expressed. Inflection applies to all words in that category. So because the possessive attaches to nouns or noun phrases, every single NP can take it. So Fred, the kids, so on. But with derivations, they tend to be limited. So lovely, the ly can attach to a lot of verbs, but not all verbs. So we can't do smokely, for instance. And then inflections tend to be further from the root. So intend and run are our roots here. So we see the inflections at the end, while the derivations tend to be closer to the root. So usually we'll see derivation appear before inflection. So that's what we did last time. Now let's talk about a few more properties. We're going to start with relevance to syntax, and I'm going to explain it because it's important, but we're not going to use it in our analyses because this is not a syntax course, and the important things where it comes like C command, you might not be really familiar with. And we're not going to spend time on those complicated trees where C command could even be really used in this course. So inflections are basically part of the syntax. So they're done with agreement, through C command, through any other syntactic operation, while derivations don't. So when you think about a sentence like he walks, and you think about where this is on a tree, you have like a subject in your TP, you have your T bar, and you have your VP. So he appears up in this position, walks appears down here. Now, basically what the C command relation says is that you can take a node like a DP, you can check its sisters and any daughters that the sister has, and whatever's in there is C commanded. So basically what it's saying here is the inflection on he is determining the inflection of something later in the sentence. So it's like he is controlling the target. So because the masculine has a he, the masculine has third person singular, the verb has to have it as well. So we can see it kind of related to the concept before where it has to show up if it can, but this is specifically because of the syntax, because of C command. You can use this to determine verbal or adjectival forms in English too. So for example, the past participle form eaten, you can use it in two positions. You can say the eaten apple to describe it, or you can say he had eaten the apple, where it's a verb. So I am alone in a very crowded apartment. You can clearly see that this is used as an adjective, but if I say I am alone in a very heated apartment, this is ungrammatical for some people in the sense that this isn't about heat itself. It's about like the metaphorical meaning, about a very heated apartment, something where there's a lot of tension. So that could be a verb in this case. But this depends on the person. To me, this is, when thinking about it as a hot room, it's all right. It's not perfect to me, but I know a lot of people who'd say this is a perfectly fine sentence. So again, this is just, inflections are relevant to the syntax and derivations are just sort of done in morphology. These ones are the ones that we will be using, so from now on. So concept. Inflected words tend to express the same concept, while derived words express a new concept. Now, these 10 properties might give us results that are not consistent with what we know, but this is a continuum approach. So a single affix might be inflectional in some cases and derivational in others. So let's see how this concept works. So attend is like our normal form. Now with attending, does it have the same meaning as attend? To attend means to show up to some event or someplace. Attending is still showing up to some event, but it means it's continuous, it's ongoing. So the meaning is still the same. The concept is still the same. So this is inflectional. What about attention? Now it's no longer about attending something or showing up. It's about directing your attention somewhere else. So this has a different meaning. So this says, okay, this ION suffix is derivational. But what about to pre-attend? We know intuitively and based on what we've done before that pre is derivational. But in terms of the meaning here, attend still means the same thing. Pre just means to do it beforehand. So it's still the same concept. So actually, according to this property, concept, pre behaves like an inflection. So yeah, it's derivational in a binary approach, but in this continuum approach, there is some property of pre that is inflectional. So when we add up everything, there's probably going to be more derivational features than inflectional features, but there can still be some. Okay, let's try something with abstractness. So inflections tend to be more abstract than derivations. So basically you can think of anything with a derivational prefix or suffix as being something that makes like a concrete thing. So when we think about king as a meaning, okay, king as a concept, it's a person. When we think about plurality, okay, there's multiple kings. So you can physically see multiple kings. However, plurality itself is abstract. The notion of having one thing or having more than one thing is an abstract concept, so this is inflectional. Same with ownership. The concept of ownership is abstract. If you were to say the king's dog, the king is physical, it's concrete. The dog is physical and concrete. But the notion of possession and ownership is abstract, so it's inflectional. Kingdom is an interesting one because kingdom is like an area that a king controls. So this can be both derivational and inflectional. This is derivational if the space is very clearly defined. It's inflectional if you're thinking more like this is a not a physical space, but rather like this, I don't know, like this large disconnected social group of people or things. Kingly is another one, doing something like a king. This is very clearly abstract, but king's men, here is our very clearly derivational meaning. So king's men, this makes a person. This is like a king subordinate. So another individual, very clearly concrete. Most suffixes and prefixes do tend to be in abstract. So a lot of them appear to be inflectional based on this property. Meaning compositionality is quite interesting. So meaning compositionality just means that an inflected form usually has compositional meaning, which means that the meaning is like determined by its parts. So you can predict it. So for instance, if we ask ourselves, does the morpheme eyes have a systematic predictable meaning? We can ask ourselves by coming up with words. So realize, to become real. Systemize, to become systematic. System. Crystallize, to become crystal. So let's start with this one on the right. So let's take this as our base form. So this is like a change. It's like to become whatever the base thing is in terms of property. So to systemize, to become systematic, it's close enough. So yeah, it's a very similar meaning. To realize something, to become real. This depends on the interpretation of realize. But for instance, in phonology, we say that the sound N is realized as M before bilabials. So this is what reality is, how things change in reality. So yeah, this is pretty systematic and predictable. So this looks to be somewhat inflectional, but I'm sure we could find a lot of examples of words where this doesn't happen, so maybe this is derivational, but from what I've seen with eyes, it is pretty systematic. There are other prefixes and suffixes that are a little bit less systematic, and we might run into those. So with allomorphy is interesting too. Allomorphy tends to not appear in inflected forms as often, and not so much on the inflection itself. So for instance, with plural s, we know that it can appear as either s, z, so z or z. It can appear as one of those three, right? But the base it attaches to does not change. So whether it's dog to dogs, or cat to cats, or box to boxes, the actual lexeme itself that you start with does not change. But with derivations, you might see that. So with a word like inflate, you can see how the T at the end is a T, inflate. But when we add this suffix ion to get inflation, it's not just the ion that we're adding, we're also changing the base, so inflate. So this is like derivational, since you might see some allomorphy in the base with derivational morphemes. Okay, so inflection, we don't really see base alteration as much. With derivation, we can. Okay, one of the main ones that we know and we use as a simple test is category change. So with inflections, you don't change the category of the word. So walk, walks, walking, and walked, these are all verbs. But with a word like live, so live is a verb. Someone who is a liver, so someone who lives, is a noun. So appears derivational here. Lively, this is an adverb, so ly appears derivational. And alive, so there's a prefix here, and this is an adjective, so this also appears to be derivational based on category change. Iteration is another one that we have in a lot of languages. So with inflections, you cannot repeat them, and this makes sense because if you have past, it doesn't make sense to do past twice when you already have past meaning involved. Or with third person agreement, if you already have agreement, you don't need more agreement. So this is why words like completed and walks sounds weird, because you already have past tense, you're adding it again. You already have third person singular, you're adding it again. Derivation, though, is fine. So we hear more funner in words, in conversations sometimes. And this is, okay, you have the comparative meaning twice. You have comparative on more, and you have the on funner. So this is repeated meanings, not necessarily repeated morpheme, or a repeated morph, so the same form. But you can do something like pre-drinking, or pre-pre-drinking, or pre-pre-pre-drinking, and so on. So in this case, you're taking a morpheme like pre, and you're just doubling up, and it repeats its meaning. So pre-drinking is drinking before drinking, and pre-pre-drinking is drinking before pre-drinking, which is drinking before drinking. So pre-pre-pre-drinking and so on, you can see how it stacks up. So these would be derivational and these would be inflectional, because derivations can repeat. Not all, but some can. Finally, expression. So this is what we'll talk about next week with exponents. When you have an inflectional morph, like let's say tov ot or mur this ot and inflections can express more than one morpheme within the same morph, or more than one meaning within the same morph. I think it might be better to put it like that. So ot here is feminine and plural at the same time. There is no way to break this apart. It's not like O is fem and T is plural. It's just ot is fem plural. And maybe something like ik would be mask plural. Who knows? There's no way to separate this. This morpheme has, or this morph has two meanings associated with it. Same with mur wall, but means singular and accusative. There's two meanings there in that one morph, and they can't be separated. So these behave inflectionally. While with derivations, it's just one meaning per morph. So singer, sing means sing, and is the agentive. It makes it human. That's what it does. It's one meaning. Spanish has this word for cornfield. So it has corn, and then it has the suffix that tells you where that item was grown. So this makes cornfield. You might have like a grape and then that morpheme, and you get like a vineyard or something. So just one meaning per morph. And this concept is called exponents. And we'll talk about that next week. So now that we have a bunch of things, a bunch of information, I've summarized this here. And I recommend just having this open when you're looking at these problems. And, it's just a nice systematic way of looking at things. So we're going to do some problems with these to identify whether some morphemes are inflectional or derivational. And what I recommend and what we'll do is we'll just not worry about the relevance to syntax, but we'll worry about everything else. So let's do an example. Let's think about the repetitive prefix re. So I'll give you some example words, like in to rewrite, so to write again, to redo, which is to do again, and to reapply, which is to apply again. So let's not worry about the relevance to syntax, but let's take a look at everything else. In fact, let me just make this a little bit smaller so it doesn't impede on our other ones. So let's think about these. If you have a sentence where you could express the repetitive meaning, do you have to? So if I want to say a sentence like I can write, it is possible to put re in front of it. Do we have to put re there? The answer is no, we don't have to put re there. So this is appearing to be derivational based on the first property. With the re, does it apply to most verbs or just like a very small subset of verbs? Well, any sort of action you can apply re to, but you can't apply it to everything. You can't re-be something. You can re-feel emotions. It's a little hard to re-cry things, although it doesn't sound awful. But it's a little weird to say, like, I felt sad. I re-felt sad, but it can be done. So it does apply to most words, but not all words. So although I think this is a little bit of both inflectional and derivation, at this point, while I'm thinking about it in this very instance, I would say this applies to almost all verbs. So I don't know if I said the same thing in class, but again, you think about things differently at different times, and in the end, we add all these I's and D's up and we see what we get. So maybe this behaves inflectionally for the second property. Is it closer to the root or further from the root? Well, you can say you can pre-reapply to something. I could add another suffix to it, or another prefix to it. So yeah, it appears to be closer to the root. So let's call that derivational. Okay, we're skipping relevance to syntax. Is it the same concept, to write and to rewrite? Yeah, it's the same concept, it's just you're doing it again. So actually that behaves inflectionally. Is it abstract or concrete? Well, to re means to do something again, which is abstract. The concept of repeating something is an abstract concept. So this appears inflectional. Is it predictable or unpredictable? Well, re is repetitive. So this is pretty predictable. So yeah, okay, this appears to be inflectional. Okay. Base allomorphy. Do we see any base allomorphy with words like re? No, not really. So this looks to be a little base allomorphy. So there. Is it the same word category? Yes, it is. Whenever we apply re, it's just repeating it. So this appears inflectional. Can we repeat it? To rewrite, to rewrite, to redo, to redo. Oh yeah, we can repeat that. And simple expression or cumulative, it just has one meaning. So it's simple. Okay, so when we add these up, what do we get? We get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 derivational, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inflectional, but really with the second property, it's kind of a mix of both. So if we sort of wash this off, either give it the score or give both of these to it, we can see that this is a little bit more derivational than this is inflectional. And if we think about relevance to syntax, it is not relevant to syntax at all. So I can add a little bit of extra thing there if we were to have that concept in. So overall, yeah, it has some properties of being inflectional, but overall it is derivational. So on a continuum, we might say, yeah, if this were in another language, this could totally be an inflectional process, but in English it is not. It is derivational. Let's try the English feminine suffix ess. So this is with words like actress, a word like mistress. I'm going to put this in for a case of meaning later. And another ess word. There's no comparative to doctor to make doctress. There's no comparison to teacher to make teacheress, but there used to be something like a waiter and waitress, although now we usually just use the term server. Something gender neutral. So, do we need to express it where we can? Like, if we have a woman and if we have a female actor, make that sound a little bit more descriptive, do we have to call a female actor an actress? Do we even have to say female actor? No, we can just say actor. We don't have to express ess if it can be expressed. We have a choice. So that behaves derivationally. What about the second part? Does it apply to all words or just some words? Well, in the case of nouns, it does not apply to every noun. It has to apply to people and only a very limited subset of people or professions. So this is very limited. It is closer to the root, and we know this because we can add like a plural s at the end to make waitresses. So that behaves very derivationally. Is it the same concept or different concept? Well, the only thing that's really changing is the gender. So actor and actress, the concept is the same. It's someone who acts, but the gender changes. However, there's also the case of like mistress. So mister and mistress don't have the same meaning. It's a different concept. So this is one of those cases where for some sets of words, it's one particular concept. For a small set of exceptions, it doesn't work the same way. So it's kind of both, depending on what you're looking at. If there were a lot of different meanings and it were completely unpredictable, I'd say it's all different concepts. But for the most part, it is the same. Is it abstract or concrete? Is something feminine an abstract thing or a concrete thing? Well, this is a conversation about gender in general, so I'm not going to touch it. We'll just leave that one untouched. I think I touched on it in class. I forget what I said. But yeah, the concept of gender, this really is more abstract. So I would say this is more abstract, but if you don't want to count this, that's fine. Is the meaning predictable or not? Again, this is the same sort of problem as the fifth property, same concept or different concept. It depends. It is somewhat predictable. It's mostly predictable because in most cases, the ESS is just the feminine version of the masculine version, but there are some exceptions. So I don't want to say it's completely unpredictable, but there are some unpredictable words. Is there any base allomorphy or not? I'll tell you there is none. What about word categories? Oh, it stays the same. Actor, actress, server, serveress, waiter, waitress. Even if you make up new words, same thing happens. Can you repeat it? An actress is, a mistress is, a waitress is. No, you cannot repeat that. So that behaves inflectionally. And finally, how much information is there? S, feminine, simple. So if we add these up, I won't add up the ones where I circled both. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 7 if we add the other two. And in terms of unique ones, we get 3 here, maybe 5 if we add the other 2. So this is more derivational than inflectional. These numbers don't add up, do they? 8. 2 is 2 repeated, that's 10. And it does. Okay. I'll tell you also, this is not really relevant to the syntax. Oh, this is relevant to the syntax in English, actually. Because gender with the pronouns is going to affect what you can use. So she is an actress, can be affected by the syntax. He is an actress. Doesn't sound good, Okay, there might actually be something changing with vocabulary over the past 10 years. So again, maybe it is relevant to the syntax, maybe not. I think for some speakers it is, and some speakers it isn't, just because gender, again, it's a changing concept right now. But it doesn't surprise us that this is somewhat inflectional, because in other languages, gender is inflectional whenever it shows up. So the fact that we have a gendered suffix in English, the fact that it is somewhat inflectional is not surprising. Let's do one more case of ism. I didn't do this one in class, but I'll do it here. So this is a word like Shakespeareanism or Shakespeareism. So let's just use the words I gave you before on the assignment. Shakespeareism, I think I used demonism, and a grammarism. Not a gramism, it's a grammarism. Okay, does it need to be expressed? It does not need to be expressed. So that's derivational. Does it apply to all words or few words? Well, we saw how few words it applied to, so not a lot of words. Is this closer to the root or not? Well, again, we kind of saw this ordering here where we said it's an outside affix. So is it closer to the root or further than the root? Well, let's just say it's further than the root, just from what we saw in the problem before, because it can't go before Ian, for example. It has to go after Ian. So Shakespeareanism is good, but Shakespeareism, Ian, is not. So let's just say it has to be further from the root. This is not relevant to the syntax at all, but we won't worry about that. Same concept or different concept? Shakespeareism, demonism, grammarism. It is a different concept. And I think of the word grammarism, and it's because it's somewhat unpredictable. A grammarism in natural conversation might be like a grammatical quality, a quirky quality of some language or person. Oh, it's a grammarism. Or a Shakespeareism. It's like a quote from him. So it's not the exact same concept. It's also not a concrete meaning. So it's sort of like this property of someone. So that's somewhat inflectional. Is it predictable? Shakespeareism, grammarism, demonism. Not really. It's not really predictable. When you think of like demonism, this is like a concept, while a grammarism is like something that is said. It's something much more specific, while Shakespeareism might be like very similar to demonism. It might be like a way of thinking. So sort of like S, it's mostly unpredictable, but there are a lot of words that do mean the same thing. So it's sort of like a wash, sort of like both, although I would lean it more towards predictability. Is there any base allomorphy? Not really. You'd have to think of a lot of words, so I'll just tell you that. Same word category or different word category? Well, there is a few cases where you can get different categories. So if you take a word like experimental, which is an adjective, you can add ism to it to make it a noun. So there can be different word categories, but it doesn't have to be. Some of them do stay the same. So again, one of those ones where it's like, oh, it's a little bit of both, except you can do different word categories, so we'll call it derivational. It can happen. It's not always the same. Can it be repeated? A Shakespeareism, a grammarism? No. Does not sound good to me. And simple expression or cumulative expression, that's simple. Whatever the meaning is, it's just there. There's nothing extra. So if we count these up, just based on D's and I's on the right side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 D's and 1, 2, 3 I's. So again, this is more derivational than inflectional. But in each of these cases, we do see some inflectional properties in these affixes. So how can we think about this? So there's two ways we can think about derivation and inflection, especially when it comes to affixes. Either these are completely separate processes and there's no continuum. So when we have something like S, So in this model, S would say this is like a D. This is 100% derivational. That's what this is saying. So that's one possibility. That's the binary possibility. The other possibility is that we have it on a continuum, like we just did. It's partially derivational and somewhat inflectional. So here's what happens if it's binary. If it's binary, what this means is that inflection and derivation are different. So they can occur at different stages in sentence formation, in language. So what happens is you have the lexicon. So this is where all your words are stored and all your morphemes. You have word formation. So this is derivation. So you create words. Okay. Then what happens is it goes through the syntax. So it does movement and things like that. And then afterwards, inflection is applied. So this is where you get your singular, your plural S, you get your possession, you get your past tense ed, all that kind of stuff. And finally, it does allomorphy and phonology at the end. So is it going to be S, is it going to be Z, or is it going to be us? You know, that's where that happens. So what this does, this makes a prediction about how words are formed. So this allows us to show ordering of our morphemes. Because derivation occurs first, obviously if we have, say, a root, all of the derivational process has to be done together. So you would get derivations around the root. Now, syntactic movement happens, and then inflection happens. So everything has to keep going bigger. It has to build on top. So this is why we get derivation closer to the root than inflections, because inflections happen later. The problem is that there are cases of languages where you have derivations further than the root than inflections. So if that does happen, then how can this be explained? This model assumes that inflection happens after, so inflections have to be outside of derivations. So when we do have cases where derivations appear further, doesn't that mean that inflection has to happen first and derivation later? Like, what's happening here? So we don't know. This is just a suggestion. This is for how it could work, and here's a problem. Here's another suggestion for how this could work, and we'll introduce another problem. So this is where it's on a continuum. So let's say S is what we had before. It is 67% derivational, and it is 33% inflectional. Let's say that. It's on a continuum. But what that means is that we can't say that derivation and inflection are separate processes, because something can be derivational and inflectional, so it's just one process. That means that you have your lexicon in your head, but word formation and inflection happen at the same time. So derivation and inflection happen together. And after that, you get your phonology and your pronunciation. So the problem with this then is that how does this explain something like affix order? Like, what is forcing derivation to happen first and be closer? Where are all these differences? How are those differences being shown in the morphology? So these are some big questions that have not been answered. This is what psycholinguists are trying to work on and will continue to work on for probably decades to come. So these are questions we cannot answer, but these are important questions for morphology in the future. So first of all, how does the pipeline from thought to production work? I mean, you have a thought in your head. That's just neurons firing. And somehow you get a grammatically correct sentence coming out of your mouth. Okay, so is morphology done at some point and then syntax? Is it done together? Like, which model should we be looking at? Is it the binary model or the continuum model, or is it something else? Question 2, that's related to question 1, with inflection. Is inflection in morphology, like, primarily, or is it in syntax primarily? And does this depend on a language? Because inflection appears in agglutinative languages and isolating languages. And agglutinative languages are explained using a lot of morphology, and isolating languages are used to explain a lot of syntax. So where is inflection? And, well, does it matter? And finally, in terms of the human brain, if we want to prove that inflection and derivation are truly different, we'd have to ask ourselves, in our brains, are we accessing them differently? So When we are producing words, for example, do we struggle with derivations but not with inflections? Are there ones that are faster? Based on our continuum model, what do we say about how morphemes are accessed? Based on the binary model, how do we say that morphemes are accessed? If we had a human and we could see different things, which model would be correct based on what we see from humans? So a lot of really interesting problems that'll be solved over the next, hopefully, 20, 30 years. Hopefully sometime before I die, so at least I can see an answer and be like, oh, that's cool. Isn't that what we all want? We want to know the answers to interesting questions before our time is up. Anyways, sorry, got to end that on a very positive note. So the exponent stuff we'll talk about next week, but that is it for this week's lesson. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. And yeah, okay. Again, I'm horrible at ending videos. I don't know what it is. I just get to the end. It's like, what do I say? Just don't want to say bye. I don't want to just stop the video abruptly. That'd be kind of weird.